The quiet dignity of Commander Elijah Reed never wavered, even as suburban soccer parents whispered behind their hands. His crime? Standing silently while watching his son Micah play. When Coach Carson and PTA President Laura Simmons decided a black father had no place on their sidelines, they called police to remove him from the field. Their smug satisfaction lasted exactly 3 minutes, until the thunderous arrival of a Navy helicopter sent to retrieve their esteemed commander. In the shocked silence that followed, a powerful truth emerged. The man they tried to erase was about to teach them all what real respect looked like. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning air was crisp and carried the scent of freshly cut grass as Elijah Reed pulled into the community soccer field's parking lot. The car clock read 7:30 a.m., a full hour before kickoff. He glanced in the rearview mirror at his son, Micah, who was staring out the window, his expression a mixture of anticipation and nerves. "Early bird gets the worm, right?" Elijah said, his deep voice filling the car's quiet interior. Micah nodded, clutching his soccer bag. Yeah. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for Coach Brent Carson's SUV and a couple of other early arrivals. Elijah had timed it this way on purpose. He preferred the quiet moments before the chaos, before the sidelines filled with parents who cast sideways glances his way. They walked together across the dew-dampened field. Micah's cleats made soft impressions in the grass. At 12, he was growing quickly, all long limbs and potential. Elijah carried his own chair and a small cooler, water bottles and orange slices for after the game. "Let's check your cleats," Elijah said, setting down his things and kneeling in front of his son. Micah placed his foot on the chair, and Elijah tightened the laces with practiced precision. His large hands moved with surprising gentleness, double knotting each shoe. "Remember what we talked about? Control the ball, keep your head up, and find the open space," Micah finished. "I know, Dad." Elijah smiled. Not with his mouth, that rarely happened these days, but with his eyes. The kind of smile you had to know to recognize. "Go warm up," he said, giving Micah's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "I'll be right here." As Micah jogged onto the field to join the handful of early teammates, Elijah set up his chair. Not among the cluster where other parents would soon gather, but slightly apart. On the edge, where he could see everything without being in the way. He sat perfectly still, back straight, eyes tracking his son's movements across the field. Coach Brent emerged from the equipment shed, clipboard in hand. He nodded curtly at Elijah, who returned the gesture with equal brevity. Their relationship had always been one of minimal interaction. Elijah preferred it that way. The sidelines gradually filled with parents carrying folding chairs and travel mugs of coffee. They arrived in waves, calling out to each other, forming their familiar clusters. Elijah remained where he was, a statue of focused attention. He's always standing there watching. A woman's voice drifted over from the parent cluster. "Kind of intimidating, don't you think? Doesn't he ever talk to anyone?" Another replied. Elijah heard them. He always heard them. But his eyes never left the field where Micah was now running drills with increasing confidence. For a moment, Elijah's mind drifted. The green field blurred, replaced by the gray metal interior of a Navy transport chopper. The roar of blades overhead. His team sitting in formation, faces set with purpose before a rescue mission in waters he wasn't allowed to name. Lieutenant Vance sitting across from him, steady as always. "Commander's looking calm as ever," she'd said. "That's why we follow." "You into hell, sir." The memory dissolved as quickly as it had formed. Elijah blinked, refocusing on the soccer field. The transition back to civilian life after his last deployment had been harder than he'd anticipated. 3 months now, and sometimes he still woke up reaching for a uniform that wasn't there. The referee's whistle cut through the morning air. Players took their positions. Micah glanced over at Elijah, who gave a single, affirming nod. That was all his son needed. The game began with the controlled chaos of youth soccer. Parents cheered and coaches shouted instructions. Elijah watched in silence, his eyes catching every detail. Micah's good positioning, the way he tracked the ball, his defensive stance. 15 minutes into the first half, Coach Brent called for substitutions. He cycled through several players. But when Micah approached the sideline, water bottle in hand, expecting to be sent in, the coach deliberately turned away. sending in another boy instead. Micah's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. He returned to the bench, eyes downcast. Elijah's jaw tightened, but his expression remained neutral. He'd seen this pattern developing over the past few weeks. When the next round of substitutions came, once again Micah was overlooked. Elijah's hands rested on his knees, the only sign of tension being his slightly whitened knuckles. Midway through the second half, Coach finally put Micah in. Within minutes, the boy intercepted a pass, dribbled down the field with precision that belied his age, and sent the ball into the net with a clean, powerful kick. Goal. The other parents erupted in cheers for their team. Micah's teammates surrounded him with high fives and pats on the back. But Coach Brent merely made a note on his clipboard, his acknowledgement noticeably muted compared to how he'd reacted to other players' successes. Elijah allowed himself a quiet clap. Pride surged in his chest, but years of military discipline kept his celebration contained. Micah searched the sideline until he found his father's eyes. Elijah nodded, this time with a hint of a smile. That small gesture meant more to Micah than any shouted praise. The game continued. Elijah noticed a woman with a PTA president pin, Laura Simmons, whispering to Coach Brent during a water break. Their eyes darted in his direction more than once. A knot formed in Elijah's stomach. He recognized the signs. The huddle of parents nearby, the sudden hush when he walked past, the evaluating stares. He's just intense, one father said, not bothering to lower his voice enough. Never smiles, never cheers. It's weird. As the final whistle blew, signaling a victory for Micah's team, Coach Brent approached Elijah. His posture was stiff, uncomfortable. Mr. Reed, he began, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Got a minute? Elijah stood. At 6'2", he towered over the coach. Of course. Look, we've had some concerns from parents. Nothing major. Brent shuffled his feet. Just thinking maybe give the kids some space, you know? Some parents feel you're a bit, well, intimidating just standing there watching so intensely all game. Elijah took a measured breath. This wasn't the first time his presence had made people uncomfortable, and it wouldn't be the last. I'm here for my son, he said simply, his voice level and controlled. Right, Brent nodded quickly. Just maybe try to blend in more. Join the other parents, chat a bit. Might help everyone feel more comfortable. Elijah looked over at Micah, who was gathering his gear, trying not to look like he was watching this interaction. I'll take that under advisement, Elijah replied. It was his standard response when given an order he had no intention of following. Coach Brent seemed ready to say more, but instead nodded and walked away, joining Laura Simmons, who was watching the exchange with undisguised interest. On the drive home, Micah was quieter than usual, staring out the window as suburban landscapes slipped by. You played well today, Elijah offered. That goal was perfectly executed. Micah turned to him, his young face troubled. Did I do something wrong? Dad, Coach hardly played me, and when I scored, he didn't even seem happy. Elijah gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. You played great. That's what matters. But the other kids, don't worry about what others think or do. Focus on your own game. Micah nodded, but Elijah could see the hurt lingering in his son's eyes. It was a pain he recognized too well, the sting of being overlooked despite your best efforts. That night, after tucking Micah into bed, Elijah stood in his study. One wall held his service memorabilia, medals and shadow boxes, a folded American flag, photographs of ships and crews. His fingers traced the edge of the flag case. It had been presented to him at his wife's funeral 4 years ago. Marie had been a civilian contractor working with the Navy when they met. Cancer had taken her quickly, leaving Elijah to raise Micah alone. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message. He entered a series of codes to access it. Commander Reed. Classified briefing. Monday 0800. Base Secure Room Alpha. Elijah's expression didn't change as he acknowledged the message. One more mission. One more time, putting on the uniform that commanded respect. The respect that vanished the moment he took it off. One more. He whispered to the empty room. The following Saturday dawned with the same routine. Elijah and Micah arrived early at the soccer field, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. Parents who normally ignored Elijah now watched him openly, their gazes lingering too long to be casual observation. Coach Brent spent extra time with the team before the game, his back pointedly turned to the sidelines where Elijah stood in his usual spot. When the starting lineup was announced, Micah's name was conspicuously absent. "But I always start," Micah whispered, confusion etched across his face. Elijah placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "Stay ready. Your chance will come." But the chance never came. Throughout the entire first half, Coach Brent didn't call Micah's name once. The boy sat on the bench, his eyes fixed on the field, trying to mask his disappointment. "Don't they think it's weird how he just stands there?" "Hey," Mother's voice carried from the nearby cluster of parents. She wasn't bothering to lower her voice. "Like he's evaluating everyone or something. He never talks to anyone," another replied. "Just watches. It's unsettling. I heard he made Jeremy's dad uncomfortable last week," a third added. "Just staring him down when he tried to make conversation." Elijah kept his gaze forward, his face impassive. The conversation about him continued as if he couldn't hear, as if he were an object rather than a person standing 10 feet away. Laura Simmons moved through the parent groups, a clipboard in hand, ostensibly organizing something for the upcoming school fundraiser. But Elijah noticed how she lingered near certain parents, how her hushed conversations often ended with glances in his direction. The second half began, and still, Micah remained benched. When the water break came, Elijah approached Coach Brent. "Is Micah injured?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Brent startled slightly, as if surprised Elijah could speak. No injury. Just team strategy today, giving some other kids a chance. He's your strongest midfielder," Elijah stated. Not a question, just a fact. Brent's expression hardened slightly. "There's more to team dynamics than just skill, Mr. Reed. I make decisions based on what's best for the entire team." The implication hung in the air between them. Elijah nodded once and returned to his position. He'd faced enough veiled prejudice in his life to recognize it instantly. The game ended with a narrow loss. Micah remained on the bench the entire time, his disappointment palpable as the team gathered for Coach Brent's post-game talk. 3 days later, Elijah received an email from the school principal requesting a meeting. The subject line read, "Routine. Discussion, Micah Reed." Nothing in Elijah's experience suggested that routine discussions existed in school administration. Every meeting had a purpose, usually one they didn't want to state explicitly. The principal's office was decorated with the standard educational achievements and student artwork. Principal Morris sat behind her desk, her smile professional but not reaching her eyes. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming in. I hope I didn't pull you away from anything important." "My son is important," Elijah replied simply, sitting in the offered chair. "What's this about?" Principal Morris shuffled some papers. "Just to check in. We like to touch base with all our parents." She paused. "There have been some observations from staff about your presence at Micah's sporting events." "Observations," Elijah repeated, the word flat. "Yes, some feel your demeanor can be somewhat intimidating to the other children and parents." "My demeanor?" The principal shifted in her seat. "Mr. Reed, this isn't an accusation. We just want to ensure everyone feels comfortable at school events." Elijah leaned forward slightly. "Has my son broken any rules? Has he been disrespectful to teachers or other students?" "No, not at all. Micah is a model student." "Then I'm struggling to understand why I'm here." Principal Morris sighed. "Mr. Reed, we're simply asking for a bit more integration. Join the other parents. Participate in conversations. Your standing apart creates a perception that you're separate from the community." Elijah stood, his movement fluid and controlled. "Thank you for your concern, Principal Morris. Is there anything else?" The meeting ended without resolution. As Elijah walked through the school hallway, he noticed a janitor quickly removing something from Micah's locker. He quickened his pace and caught a glimpse of a piece of paper with the words "Creeps Kid" scrawled across it. The janitor looked startled when he realized Elijah had seen it. "Sorry, sir. I was just taking this down before your boy saw it." Elijah's expression remained unchanged, but something cold settled in his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. That evening, Micah was unusually quiet during dinner. Elijah noticed, but didn't push. Years of military leadership had taught him that sometimes silence was necessary for processing. "Dad," Micah finally said as they were clearing the dishes, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why does Coach bench me now? I talked to him today after practice, and he said..." Micah hesitated. He said sometimes it's not just about skill. It's about what your people bring. The plate in Elijah's hands nearly slipped. He set it down carefully before turning to his son. What exactly did he say? Micah shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite the hurt in his eyes. Just that. Then he walked away. The other kids don't talk to me much anymore either. Elijah knelt to eye level with his son. Micah, listen to me. There will always be people who try to make you feel smaller than you are. People who will judge you before knowing you. Your job isn't to make them comfortable. Your job is to stand tall in your truth. But why? Because some people fear what they don't understand. And sometimes, people like us get misunderstood a lot. Micah nodded slowly, absorbing his father's words. Later that night, Elijah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Jackson Daniels. Jax, his friend and colleague from the Navy. Eli, man, how's civilian life treating you? Jax's voice was casual, but Elijah detected the underlying concern. It's an adjustment. Yeah, I bet. A pause. Listen, words getting around. They're watching everything, Eli. Don't slip. You're too visible now. Elijah moved to his study, closing the door. Explain. That school thing. The soccer coach. It's making waves. Small-town drama has a way of escalating. Just be careful, man. After hanging up, Elijah sat in the darkness of his study. He'd faced enemy fire, led rescue missions in hurricane conditions, navigated political tensions in foreign ports. Yet somehow, this, standing on a soccer field watching his son play, had become a battleground. The following morning, he found Micah sitting on the back porch, knees pulled to his chest, eyes red-rimmed. Micah, Elijah sat beside him. What's wrong? Micah shook his head, wiping his eyes quickly. Nothing. I'm fine. Elijah didn't push. Instead, he sat in companionable silence, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. People will try to shrink you, he said finally. Don't let them. That afternoon, an email notification appeared on Elijah's phone. It was from another parent, someone he'd never spoken to, who had accidentally included him in a reply-all thread. The original email was from Coach Brent to several parents, including Laura Simmons. Concerned about the looming presence on the sidelines. Creates an uncomfortable atmosphere for the other children and parents. Perhaps we should discuss appropriate boundaries. Laura's response was included. Let's ask him to step back. For the good of the team. Elijah read the thread twice, his expression unchanging. Then he composed a reply, careful to include everyone in the original email. I appreciate your concerns. However, I am not leaving my son's side. That is non-negotiable. If my presence is disruptive, perhaps we should examine why a father supporting his child quietly is perceived as threatening. I am open to discussion, but not to absence. Respectfully, Elijah Reed. He hit send before he could reconsider. The response was immediate. A flurry of backpedaling and apologies from parents who claimed they were just concerned about team dynamics. Coach Brent didn't respond at all. That night, Elijah sat at his desk reviewing the classified briefing materials from Monday's meeting. His mind kept drifting to the situation at Micah's school. As a commander, he'd learned to identify battle lines before they were formally drawn. This was escalating from whispers to action, and Micah was caught in the crossfire. His phone buzzed with a text from Lieutenant Vance. All set for next week, Commander. Team's ready. Elijah replied with a simple acknowledgement. In one world, he commanded respect that was unquestioned. In another, he was viewed with suspicion for simply existing in the same space as his son. The dichotomy wasn't new. It was just more pronounced now, more painful because it affected Micah too. Elijah closed the briefing documents and walked to his son's room. Micah was asleep, his soccer trophies lining a shelf above his bed. Elijah stood in the doorway, watching his son's peaceful breathing. I won't let them diminish you, he whispered. Whatever it takes. He didn't yet know that whatever it takes would soon test every ounce of restraint he possessed and would change their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. The Saturday morning dawned with heavy clouds hanging low in the sky, mirroring the tension that had been building for weeks. Elijah and Micah arrived at the soccer field following their usual routine, early, quiet, prepared. As they walked from the parking lot, Elijah noticed more parents than usual had arrived early. They stood in small clusters, conversations stopping abruptly when they passed by. Something feels different today, Micah said softly, kicking a pebble. Across the asphalt, Elijah placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. Focus on your game. Nothing else matters. But even Elijah could sense the shift in atmosphere. Laura Simmons stood with Coach Brent near the equipment shed, both of them watching his approach with undisguised animosity. Several parents had their phones out, held casually at their sides but angled in his direction. Elijah set up his chair in his usual spot, slightly removed from the main parent section. He sat with his back straight, eyes forward, focusing on Micah as he joined his teammates for warm-ups. The familiar routine felt different today, charged with an electricity that reminded him of moments before operations went sideways. The game began, and to Elijah's surprise, Coach Brent put Micah in the starting lineup. But the reason became clear quickly. The opposing team was significantly stronger, and Micah was being set up as the scapegoat for an inevitable loss. Halfway through the first period, during a water break, Coach Brent approached Elijah. His face was flushed, jaw set. Laura Simmons and several other parents lingered nearby, watching. "Mr. Reed," Coach Brent said loudly enough for others to hear, "I need you to leave now." The sideline went quiet. Players paused their water break to watch. Micah froze mid-drink, his eyes widening. Elijah remained seated, his expression unchanged. "Excuse me, you're making people uncomfortable." Coach Brent crossed his arms. "Parents have complained. I'm asking you to leave the field." Elijah looked past him to where Micah stood, watching with horror etched across his young face. Then he scanned the sidelines, noting how many parents had their phones raised now, recording. This had been planned. "I'm standing on public grass, watching my son," Elijah said, his voice calm but firm. "I won't be going anywhere." Coach Brent's face reddened further. "This is my field during game time, and I have the authority. You have the authority to coach soccer." Elijah cut in, standing slowly. Not to remove parents without cause. The confrontation had drawn everyone's attention now. Players stood, frozen on the field. Parents edged closer, some looking uncomfortable, others with barely disguised satisfaction. "He's been like this for weeks," Laura Simmons said to another mother, loudly enough to be heard. Standing there, watching everyone. "It's intimidating the children." Elijah heard a phone call being made. Words like "threatening situation" and "won't leave when asked" drifted across the field. His jaw tightened, but his expression remained composed. He'd faced worse than this. Much worse. Micah broke away from his teammates and started toward his father, but Elijah gave a subtle shake of his head. "Stay put. Don't make it worse." 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Two officers stepped out, adjusting their belts as they approached the field. The game had resumed in the meantime, but nobody was really watching it. All eyes were on the developing situation at the sideline. "Someone called about a disturbance?" the first officer asked, looking between Coach Brent and Elijah. "This man refuses to leave when asked," Coach Brent said quickly. "He's been making parents and children uncomfortable for weeks." The officer turned to Elijah. "Sir, can I see some ID, please?" With deliberate calmness, Elijah reached for his wallet and handed over his civilian ID. It was a simple driver's license with the name, E. Reed, and his address. Nothing more. The second officer took the ID, studying it. "What's going on here today, Mr. Reed?" "I'm watching my son play soccer," Elijah replied evenly. "As I do every Saturday." Laura stepped forward. "He's been giving us trouble for weeks." Just standing there, watching everyone. "The children are scared." The first officer's hand drifted toward his taser, a subtle movement that Elijah immediately registered. He'd been in enough volatile situations to recognize when things were about to escalate. "Sir, if you're causing distress," the officer began. "Dad." Micah's voice cut through the tension as he ran from the field, ignoring Coach Brent's shout to stay put. He reached Elijah's side, breathless and panicked. "Dad, just go, please." Elijah knelt to meet his son's eyes. "Micah, listen to me. We never run when we've done nothing wrong. But they're going to, trust me," Elijah said softly. He stood, facing the officers again. The crowd had grown, phones recording from every angle. Coach Brent looked triumphant. Laura Simmons watched with thinly veiled satisfaction. "Officers," Elijah said calmly, "I'm standing on public property, watching my son play soccer. I have not threatened anyone. I have not disrupted the game. I have not broken any laws." The first officer frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Sir," Sometimes it's best to just. He was interrupted by a sound that cut through the Saturday morning air like a knife. The distinctive whump 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 of helicopter blades. Everyone looked up as the sound grew louder, closer. A Navy transport helicopter approached low over the tree line, its dark shape imposing against the cloudy sky. Parents grabbed their children, pulling them back as the helicopter circled once, then began descending toward the adjacent practice field. "What the hell?" Coach Brent said, his face paling. Elijah remained still, watching as the helicopter touched down 100 yards away. The side door slid open, and a uniformed Navy officer stepped to the edge, saluting sharply in Elijah's direction. Without a word, Elijah turned to Micah. "Stay with the team. I'll be back soon." "Dad." Micah's voice was uncertain. "It's okay," Elijah assured him, then walked toward the helicopter with measured steps, his back straight, his gait shifting subtly into the disciplined stride of a military commander. As he approached, Lieutenant Vance jumped down from the helicopter and saluted crisply. "Commander Reed, your ride's here, sir. Sorry for the interruption." The officers who had been questioning Elijah moments before stood frozen, their expressions shifting from suspicion to confusion. Parents lowered their phones, suddenly uncertain about what they were witnessing. Elijah returned Lieutenant Vance's salute. "Is there an emergency, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir. Admiral Blackwood requested your immediate presence. Details are classified." Elijah nodded, then turned back toward the soccer field. The officers who had confronted him were now standing awkwardly, clearly processing the revelation of who they had been questioning. Coach Brent had backed several steps away, his face ashen. Elijah walked directly to the officers. "You just made a scene out of a father supporting his son," he said, his voice carrying despite not being raised. "Next time, ask better questions." He turned to Micah, who was watching with wide eyes. "I'll be back tonight. We'll talk then." With that, Elijah walked to the helicopter and climbed aboard. Lieutenant Vance followed, and the door slid shut. Moments later, the helicopter lifted off, leaving behind a field full of stunned onlookers, a confused police presence, and a soccer game that no one was paying attention to anymore. As the helicopter gained altitude, Lieutenant Vance handed Elijah a headset to communicate over the rotor noise. "I take it that wasn't a coincidence," Elijah said, putting on the headset. Vance shook her head. "Your friend Jax has been monitoring the situation. When he saw those emails and heard about today's plan to confront you, he decided to intervene." The Admiral, fully briefed and on board, "Sir," he said, and I quote, "Nobody messes with my top commander." For the first time in weeks, Elijah allowed himself a small smile. Jax always did have a flair for the dramatic. From the cockpit, a familiar voice came over the headset. "Thought you could use a reminder of who you are, Commander." Jax grinned over his shoulder. "Plus, I've been looking for an excuse to take this bird out." By Sunday morning, the video had gone viral. Elijah sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through his phone with a cup of coffee growing cold beside him. Dozens of versions of the same footage flooded social media platforms. Black Navy commander targeted at kids game had become the leading hashtag overnight. Some videos focused on the confrontation with Coach Brent, others on the police officers' approach, but all ended with the helicopter landing and the revelation of his identity. Micah padded into the kitchen, still in his pajamas despite the late morning hour. "We're famous, huh?" Elijah set his phone down. "Infamous, maybe. The guys have been texting me all morning," Micah said, opening the refrigerator. "Everyone wants to know if you're really a Navy commander." "And what did you tell them?" Micah poured himself a glass of orange juice. "I said you're just my dad." Elijah smiled, a real one this time. "Good answer." His phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Dean Mitchell, local news anchor for Channel 7. Elijah declined the call, the fifth from the same number since last night. His email inbox was similarly flooded with interview requests from news outlets across the country. As Micah ate his breakfast, Elijah's phone rang again. This time it was Lieutenant Vance. "Sir, have you seen the news?" she asked without preamble. "Hard to avoid it. The base is getting calls too. Admiral Blackwood wants to know your plans for addressing this." Elijah rubbed his temples. "I don't have plans, Lieutenant. This was never about publicity. With respect, sir, it's beyond that now. People are taking sides." After hanging up, Elijah found Micah watching him from across the table. Are we in trouble, Dad? No, Elijah said firmly. We've done nothing wrong. This will blow over. But by Monday morning, it was clear the situation was only intensifying. Elijah dropped Micah off at school to find a small crowd of reporters. In the parking lot, he managed to avoid them by using a side entrance. But the message was clear. This story wasn't going away. In his classroom, Micah noticed an immediate shift. Classmates who had been avoiding him for weeks were suddenly fascinated, peppering him with questions about his father. Some apologized awkwardly for past behavior. Others kept their distance, clearly confused by the sudden reversal in Micah's social status. By lunchtime, Principal Morris had called an emergency faculty meeting. The video had been viewed millions of times, and the school was being flooded with calls from parents, media, and even military veterans groups expressing outrage over Elijah and Micah's treatment. Meanwhile, Laura Simmons was in full damage control mode. She'd released a statement calling the whole incident a regrettable misunderstanding and claiming that no one was aware of Commander Reed's military status. As if that should matter, Elijah muttered to himself when he read her statement. The implication was clear. If they'd known he was a Navy commander, they would have treated him with respect. But as just another black father, he was suspect. Coach Brent had gone silent, deleting his social media accounts after they were flooded with negative comments. The school board announced it would be reviewing the incident. That afternoon, Elijah received a call from the school. Micah had been involved in an altercation with another student who had made a comment about the incident. No one was hurt, but the principal requested Elijah's presence. When he arrived at the school, the atmosphere was noticeably tense. Staff members who had previously ignored him now nodded respectfully. Principal Morris greeted him with a forced smile. "Commander Reed, thank you for coming in," she said, using his military title for the first time. "It's Mr. Reed during school hours." Elijah corrected her calmly. "I in her office." Micah sat in a chair, arms crossed defensively. A boy with a red face sat across from him. Micah defended himself verbally when Tyler here made some unfortunate comments about Saturday's events. Principal Morris explained. "We've addressed the inappropriate language with Tyler, but I thought you should be aware." Elijah looked at his son. "You okay?" Micah nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Can I have a moment with my son?" Elijah asked. When they were alone, Micah finally looked up. "He said you made a scene because you wanted attention, that you embarrassed everyone." Elijah took the seat next. To his son, "What did you say back?" "That he didn't know anything about you. That you never wanted attention. You just wanted to watch me play." Micah hesitated. "I didn't hit him, Dad. I wanted to, but I remembered what you said about control." Pride swelled in Elijah's chest. "You did right. Why didn't you tell them?" Micah asked suddenly. "About being a commander? They would have treated you differently." The question hung in the air between them. Elijah considered his answer carefully. "Because I shouldn't have to," he said finally. "I shouldn't need a uniform. To be treated with basic respect." When they left the principal's office, they found Dean Mitchell waiting in the school lobby, cameraman in tow. He approached quickly, microphone extended. "Commander Reed, Dean Mitchell, Channel 7 News. Could we get a statement about Saturday's events? The video has gone viral, and people want to hear your side." Elijah positioned himself between the camera and Micah. "No comment. The public is very interested in your story," Dean pressed. "Coach Carson has declined to comment, and Laura Simmons is claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Don't you want to set the record straight?" "What I want," Elijah said evenly, "is to take my son home without cameras in his face. That's what I want, Mr. Mitchell." The news anchor had the grace to look embarrassed. He lowered the microphone slightly. "Of course. But this story isn't going away, Commander. If you change your mind about that interview, call me. Better to control the narrative than have others define it for you." That evening, Elijah received an email from Principal Morris. The school board was calling an emergency meeting to address the unfortunate incident at the soccer field. They requested his presence to clear the air and move forward as a community. "They want to save face," Lieutenant Vance said when he called her for advice. "Make a public show of reconciliation so they don't look bad." "I'm not interested in being their prop," Elijah replied. "I understand that, sir. But this platform could be valuable, not just for you and Micah, but for others who might face similar treatment." Elijah was silent for a moment, considering her words. "I'll think about it." After hanging up, He found Micah sitting on the back porch, staring at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. "Kids at school are treating me differently now," Micah said without looking at his father. "Some are being nice all of a sudden. Others are staying away completely." Elijah sat beside him. "How do you feel about that?" Micah shrugged, confused. "I guess. Nothing about me changed. I'm still the same person I was last week when they were calling me Creep's kid and leaving me out." The pain in his son's voice cut Elijah deeper than any combat wound ever had. He'd faced discrimination throughout his life and career, but seeing Micah experience it, watching him process the ugly realities of how the world sometimes worked, was almost unbearable. "People fear what they don't understand," Elijah said. "And sometimes, when they discover they were wrong, they don't know how to make it right. So what do we do now?" Elijah looked up at the same stars his son was watching. "We keep standing our ground. With dignity." The next morning, a package arrived at their door. Inside was a Navy uniform freshly pressed and ready for wear, along with a note from Admiral Blackwood for the school meeting. "Remind them who they're dealing with." Elijah smiled, but set the uniform aside. That wasn't the message he wanted to send. Meanwhile, Dean Mitchell had begun an investigative report on the incident. His news team interviewed other parents who had witnessed the confrontation, former military colleagues of Elijah's, and experts on racial bias. Notably absent were comments from Coach Brent or Laura Simmons, both of whom had declined to be interviewed. The story was evolving beyond the viral video moment. Dean's investigation uncovered a pattern of similar incidents at the school. Other parents of color who had faced subtle discrimination, children who had been marginalized, concerns that had been dismissed. By Wednesday, a petition demanding Coach Brent's removal had gathered thousands of signatures. The school board meeting scheduled for Friday was moved to the auditorium to accommodate the expected crowd. Laura Simmons attempted to reframe the narrative, sending an email to the PTA members characterizing the situation as a learning opportunity for the community and suggesting a diversity training program that she would personally oversee. The response was tepid at best, with several parents openly questioning her fitness to lead such an initiative given her role in the incident. That afternoon, Elijah received a call from an unexpected source, the police chief. "Mr. Reed, I want to personally apologize for how my officers handled the situation on Saturday," the chief said. "They should have asked more questions before escalating the situation." "Thank you," Elijah replied, surprised by the call. "The officers involved will be receiving additional training, and I'd like to speak with you about possibly helping with that training when the dust settles." The chief's call was followed by others, from the mayor's office, from veterans groups, from parents at the school who wanted to express their support. The story had touched a nerve, forcing conversations that had long been avoided. Micah continued to attend school, holding his head high despite the awkward interactions and sudden attention. His soccer team practiced without Coach Brent, who had taken a leave of absence, pending the school board's review done on Thursday evening. Elijah sat with Micah reviewing his homework when the doorbell rang. Lieutenant Vance stood on the porch, in civilian clothes, holding a folder. "Commander, I thought you should see these before tomorrow's meeting," she said, handing him the folder once they were inside. Inside were emails and text messages between Coach Brent and Laura Simmons, obtained through Dean Mitchell's investigation. They revealed a deliberate campaign to remove Elijah from the sidelines, with explicit references to his race and comments about him being intimidating and not fitting in with the other parents. "How did Mitchell get these?" Elijah asked, his expression hardening as he read. "Anonymous source," Vance replied. "But the authenticity has been verified. Mitchell plans to include them in his report tomorrow night." After Vance left, Elijah sat alone in his study, reading through the messages. The naked prejudice was jarring, even though he'd suspected it all along. One exchange particularly stood out. "Laura, he just stands there watching. The silent shadow. It's creepy. Brent, I've tried to get him to leave, but he won't take the hint. His kid has talent, but the attitude is the same. Like they're entitled to special treatment." Elijah closed the folder, a cold anger settling in his chest. It wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't even about Micah. It was about a pattern that affected countless others who didn't have viral videos or Navy helicopters to highlight their stories. His phone rang. It was Dean Mitchell again. This time, Elijah answered. "Commander Reed, thank you for taking my call," Dean said, clearly surprised. "I'm finalizing my report for tomorrow's broadcast, and I wanted to give you one more opportunity to comment." Elijah was silent for a moment, weighing his options. Then he made a decision. "One interview," he said finally. "At the school, with the parents and kids watching. Nothing else." Dean's voice held barely contained excitement. "Agreed. Before the board meeting tomorrow." "After," Elijah corrected. "I want to hear what they have to say first." After hanging up, Elijah walked to Micah's room. His son was sitting on his bed, reading a book about naval aviation that Jax had given him. "There's going to be a lot of attention tomorrow," Elijah said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "How do you feel about that?" Micah considered the question. "Nervous, but also, I don't know. Like maybe it matters." "What matters?" "What happened to us? Maybe if people hear about it, it won't happen to someone else." Micah looked up at his father. "Is that why you're going to talk to the news guy? To help other people?" Elijah nodded slowly. "Partly, but mostly because you asked me a question I couldn't answer." "What question?" "Why I didn't tell them who I was." Elijah met his son's eyes. "The truth is, I shouldn't have had to. But staying silent didn't protect you. And that's my job, to protect you. Sometimes that means speaking up, even when I'd rather not." Micah nodded thoughtfully. "Dad, what if someone else goes through this, and their dad isn't a commander?" The question hit Elijah like a physical blow. In that moment, he saw his son not just as a boy growing up, but as a young man developing a moral compass that pointed true. "That's exactly why I need to speak," Elijah said softly. "Not just as Commander Reed, but as your father." That night, for the first time since the incident, Elijah slept without dreams of choppers or mission briefings. Instead, he dreamed of standing on a quiet field, watching Micah play soccer. Just a father and son, unremarkable in their ordinariness. It was the simplest dream, and yet, somehow, the most ambitious. Friday evening arrived with a tension that hung in the air like approaching thunder. Elijah stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie. He'd chosen civilian clothes deliberately, a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, blue tie. Not his Navy uniform, despite Admiral Blackwood's suggestion. Tonight wasn't about his rank or military status. It was about being a father. "Looking sharp, Dad," Micah said from the doorway, already dressed in his best clothes. Khaki pants and a button-down shirt that suddenly seemed too small for his growing frame. Elijah turned, studying his son. "You too. Ready for this?" Micah shrugged, his attempt at nonchalance betrayed by the nervousness in his eyes. "I guess. Everyone at school was talking about it. Some kids said their parents are coming just to see what happens." "It's not a show," Elijah said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's about setting things right." As they drove to the school, Elijah noticed Micah fidgeting with his phone. "Dean Mitchell's report is airing right now," Micah said, scrolling through messages. "Tyler just texted me. He says it's intense." Elijah kept his eyes on the road. "We'll hear about it soon enough." The school parking lot was packed when they arrived. News vans lined the street, reporters standing under bright lights with microphones. "Ready?" Elijah guided Micah through a side entrance, avoiding the cameras. The auditorium was standing room only. Parents, teachers, students, and community members filled every seat. A table had been set up on the stage for the school board members, with Principal Morris seated at one end. Laura Simmons sat in the front row, her expression tightly controlled. Coach Brent was notably absent as Elijah and Micah made their way. Down the aisle, a hush fell over the crowd. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. All eyes followed them as they took seats near the middle, neither hiding at the back nor positioning themselves prominently at the front. The board chairman, a gray-haired man named Walter Thompson, called the meeting to order. "Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're all here because of a situation that has gained national attention. Our goal tonight is to listen, learn, and find a path forward that serves our entire community." The first hour was filled with carefully worded statements from the board, promises of investigation, commitments to diversity, plans for sensitivity training. Principal Morris spoke about the school's values of inclusion and respect. The words were right, but Elijah noted the lack of specific acknowledgement of what had actually happened. Then the floor opened for community comments. Laura Simmons was the first to approach the microphone. Her voice wavered slightly, but her chin was raised defiantly. I want to address what the media is calling a racial incident at our soccer field. She began. As PTA president, I've always advocated for a safe environment for all children. What happened last Saturday was unfortunate, but it's being portrayed unfairly. No one knew Commander Reed's military status. If we had, so it would have been acceptable to treat him that way if he weren't a commander? The question came from a woman in the third row, a mother Elijah recognized from soccer games, but had never spoken to. Laura faltered. That's not what I meant. Channel 7 just aired texts between you and Coach Carson. Another parent called out. You called Commander Reed the silent shadow and his son the attitude kid. How do you explain that? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Laura's face drained of color as she realized that Dean Mitchell's report had aired while she was sitting in the auditorium. Those messages were taken out of context, she stammered, and they were private communications that were illegally. My son was benched for weeks. Elijah's voice cut through the rising tension, though he hadn't moved from his seat. Not because of his skill, but because of who his father is. That's the context, Miss Simmons. All eyes turned to Elijah, who sat calmly with his hands folded in his lap. The room fell silent. Chairman Thompson cleared his throat. Commander Reed, would you like to address the board formally? Not at this time, Elijah replied. I'm here to listen. His restraint was more powerful than any speech could have been. Laura returned to her seat, face burning. More parents came forward, many expressing outrage at what they'd seen in the news report. Dean Mitchell's investigation had been thorough, including interviews with several military colleagues who spoke of Elijah's leadership and character. The report included messages where Coach Carson explicitly told other coaches to give Micah Reed less playing time. One father said angrily, my son plays on that team. How can we trust any of the coaching decisions now? As the meeting continued, Elijah noticed Micah watching the proceedings with intense focus. This wasn't just about soccer anymore. It was about justice, accountability, and the kind of community they wanted to live in. After nearly 2 hours of public comments, Chairman Thompson announced that the board had already made several decisions. Coach Carson had been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. A review of all athletic programs would be conducted to ensure fair treatment of all students, and sensitivity training would be mandatory for all staff and coaches. Additionally, Thompson said, looking directly at Elijah, we want to extend a formal apology to Commander Reed and his son, Micah. What happened was unacceptable, and we are committed to ensuring it never happens again. The meeting concluded with promises of follow-up actions and ongoing dialogue. As people began to file out, many stopped to speak with Elijah, offering support or simply introducing themselves. Through it all, he remained composed, thanking them quietly but not engaging in lengthy conversations. Dean Mitchell approached. As the crowd thinned, cameraman in tow. Commander Reed, are you still willing to give that interview we discussed? Elijah glanced at Micah, who nodded slightly. Yes, but not with cameras chasing us. We'll do it here, now, while people are still present. Dean looked surprised, but quickly recovered. Of course. Where would you like to sit? The stage, Elijah said. Where everyone can see and hear. Word spread quickly that Elijah was about to speak. People who had been leaving returned to their seats. Those who remained moved closer. Even Principal Morris and the board members stayed, curious to hear what the man at the center of the controversy would finally say. As Dean set up for the interview, Lieutenant Vance slipped into the auditorium, taking a seat near the back. She caught Elijah's eye and gave a subtle nod of encouragement. Dean began with standard questions about the incident itself, which Elijah answered factually and without embellishment. Then the reporter shifted to more personal territory. Commander Reed, many people are wondering why you never mentioned your military rank during these interactions. Was that a deliberate choice? Before Elijah could answer, the side door opened, and a familiar figure entered the auditorium. Coach Brent Carson stood awkwardly at the back, his face pale and drawn. A collective murmur rose from the crowd as people noticed his presence. Elijah acknowledged him with a slight nod, then turned back to Dean. I never mentioned my rank because it shouldn't matter. I was there as Micah's father, not as a Navy commander. But surely you must have known it would have changed how you were treated. That's precisely the problem, Mr. Mitchell. Elijah's voice remained calm, but carried throughout the silent auditorium. The respect I'm given shouldn't depend on my uniform or rank. It should be extended to every parent supporting their child. In the back of the room, Coach Brent shifted uncomfortably. Dean pressed on. Your colleagues describe you as a natural leader, someone who commands respect in high-pressure situations. Did you apply those same skills during this conflict? I've been trained to lead men into chaos, Elijah replied, his gaze sweeping across the audience. But no training prepares you to watch your child be singled out for existing. The auditorium fell completely silent as Elijah continued. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. The hardest missions I've led weren't the ones with enemy fire or rough seas, he said, his voice steady and measured. They were the ones where I had to maintain composure when everything inside me wanted to react. That's what these past months have been, a mission to show my son how to face injustice with dignity. Dean leaned forward. You addressed the parents directly. What would you say to them now? Elijah's gaze swept across the audience, making eye contact with several parents he recognized from the sidelines. You thought I was a threat because I didn't smile enough, because I stood still. But I was taught stillness as strength. I was taught to protect, even in silence. He paused, letting the words sink in. What you saw as intimidating was simply a father watching over his child. As he spoke, Elijah's mind flashed back to moments from his military career, the helicopter extraction of civilians from a flooding coastline, the tense standoff with pirates in international waters, the night he'd lost 2 men under his command during a rescue operation gone wrong. Each memory carried its own weight, its own lesson in leadership and sacrifice. I've stood watch in war zones, he continued. I've made life and death decisions under fire. And yet, somehow, standing on that soccer field became my most difficult post, because I was watching my son navigate a battlefield I couldn't shield him from. Micah sat in the front row now, his eyes wide, taking in this side of his father he'd rarely seen. The commander, the leader, the man who carried responsibility with such quiet strength. The silence you found so threatening? Elijah said. That was restraint. That was me choosing every Saturday not to respond to the whispers, the stares, the assumptions. Not because I didn't hear them, but because I wanted to teach my son that our dignity isn't determined by other people's perceptions. In the back of the auditorium, Coach Brent had moved further into the room, standing against the wall with his arms crossed defensively. His face showed a complex mixture of emotions, shame, defiance, confusion. Dean Mitchell gestured toward the audience. Some might say your military position gives you a platform that others in similar situations don't have. How do you respond to that? They'd be right, Elijah acknowledged. Which is why I'm speaking now. Not for myself, but for every parent who's been made to feel unwelcome in spaces where their children belong. For every child who's been overlooked because of who their parents are. A woman in the middle of the audience stood up suddenly. Elijah recognized her as one of the mothers who had been part of Laura's inner circle. I was part of the whispers, she said, her voice trembling. And I was wrong. My daughter plays with Micah, and I never once thought about how our actions were affecting him. I'm sorry. Her words seemed to break a dam. Another parent stood, and then another, each offering similar acknowledgments. The collective recognition of harm done hung heavy in the air. From his position at the back, Coach Brent stepped forward. I never meant, he began, but his words were met with an immediate reaction from the crowd. Murmurs turned to outright challenges. You benched a kid because of his father. You called the police on a parent for watching his son play. We saw the texts, Coach. We know exactly what you meant. Principal Morris quickly intervened, guiding Coach Brent toward a side exit as the tension in the room threatened to boil over. Elijah remained composed throughout the commotion. When order was restored, Dean continued the interview. Commander Reed, after everything that's happened, what do you want to see change? Elijah considered the question carefully. I want my son to be judged by his character and his actions, not by assumptions about who he is or where he comes from. I want that for every child. And I want parents to think carefully about the messages they send when they tolerate bias, even the quiet kind. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering Elijah's military career, his life as a single father after his wife's death, and his hopes for Micah's future. Throughout it all, he spoke with the same measured dignity that had characterized his silence on the sidelines. When Dean finally wrapped up, The audience rose to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. It wasn't the thunderous applause of entertainment, but the solemn recognition of truth spoken plainly. Elijah didn't bow or acknowledge the applause. He simply nodded once, shook Dean's hand, and stepped down from the stage to where Micah waited. They made their way through the crowd, accepting brief words of support but not lingering. Lieutenant Vance fell into step beside them as they reached the exit. "That was quite something, Commander," she said quietly. "It needed to be said." Elijah replied, in the hallway outside the auditorium, away from the cameras and crowd. Micah suddenly wrapped his arms around his father's waist in a tight hug. "You didn't just speak for me, Dad," he said, his voice muffled against Elijah's suit jacket. "You spoke for a lot of kids like me." Elijah held his son close, one hand gently resting on the back of Micah's head. Then maybe it was worth breaking the silence. Lieutenant Vance discreetly stepped away, giving them privacy in the moment. When Micah finally pulled back, he wiped quickly at his eyes. "Is it always going to be like this?" he asked, the question carrying more weight than his young voice should have to bear. Elijah knelt to eye level with his son, placing his hands on Micah's shoulders. "No, not always, and not everywhere. But when it is, you'll be ready. Because you know who you are, and that's something no one can take from you." As they walked toward the parking lot, Elijah noticed Dean Mitchell wrapping up a live broadcast near the school entrance. The reporter caught his eye and gave a respectful nod. In the distance, Laura Simmons hurried to her car, head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The consequences of her actions were only beginning to unfold. The night air was cool and clear as they drove home, the tension of the past weeks finally beginning to ease. Micah rolled down his window, letting the breeze ruffle his hair. "Dad?" he said after a long silence. I think I want to keep playing soccer. Not for Coach Brent, but I don't want to quit because of him." Elijah reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. "I think that's a good decision. And you'll still come watch me? Even after all this?" "Especially after all this. Front row seat, every game." Micah grinned, the first genuine smile Elijah had seen from him in weeks. The following morning, Elijah woke to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly. Dean Mitchell's interview had aired in its entirety on the late news, and by morning it had gone viral, eclipsing even the helicopter footage. The story had transcended local news, picked up by national outlets framing it as a powerful statement on racial bias and fatherhood. Elijah silenced his phone and went downstairs to make breakfast. Micah was already up, watching a replay of the interview on his tablet. "You're famous now, Dad," he said, looking up as Elijah entered the kitchen. "Not by choice," Elijah replied, starting the coffee maker. "The comments are mostly good," Micah reported, scrolling through responses to the video. "People are saying you should run for office or something." Elijah chuckled. "I think I'll stick to my day job." A knock at the door interrupted their breakfast. Lieutenant Vance stood on the porch, in uniform this time, with an official-looking folder tucked under her arm. "Morning, Commander," she said crisply. "Admiral Blackwood sends his compliments." He watched the interview, and Elijah invited her in, closing the door against the curious neighbors who had suddenly found reasons to be out on their front lawns. And he said, and I quote, "That's why we need him back at the helm." She handed him the folder. "Your new orders, sir. The training initiative we discussed, supporting veterans transitioning to civilian life. The Admiral wants you to lead it." Elijah opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. "This is more than a training program, Lieutenant. This is a full policy overhaul." Vance nodded. "After seeing what you experienced firsthand, the Admiral believes you're uniquely positioned to address the challenges veterans face when they leave the service, especially those who might face additional bias in civilian settings." Micah leaned against the doorframe, listening. "Does that mean we're staying here? Not moving to another base?" "That's correct, young man," Vance said with a smile. "Your dad will be working primarily from the local base, with some travel for consultations. But this would be your home base." The relief on Micah's face was evident. After everything that had happened, the prospect of starting over somewhere new would have been overwhelming. Later that morning, Elijah received a call from the school board chairman. Coach Brent had submitted his resignation, effective immediately. In his resignation letter, he'd admitted to biased treatment of Micah and inappropriate communications regarding Elijah. We've already begun the search for a replacement, Thompson explained. Someone who can rebuild trust with the team and the community. In the meantime, would you consider speaking to our staff at an upcoming professional development day? Your perspective would be invaluable. Elijah agreed, recognizing that real change would require ongoing engagement, not just a single moment of reckoning. That as the day progressed, more news filtered in. Laura Simmons had stepped down as PTA president, her position untenable after the public exposure of her text messages. Her carefully worded resignation email, forwarded to Elijah by another parent, managed to acknowledge harm without actually accepting responsibility, referring to the situation as a learning experience for the community. By afternoon, the story had evolved further. Veterans groups had reached out offering support. Parents from other schools shared similar experiences. What had begun as one father standing his ground on a soccer field had become a catalyst for broader conversations about bias, respect, and community accountability. Micah spent the day messaging with teammates who reported that an emergency team meeting had been called for Monday to discuss next steps. The consensus among the players was clear. They wanted Micah back in his starting position. They're saying they should have spoken up sooner, Micah told his father, a mixture of vindication and lingering hurt in his voice. It's easy to recognize injustice in hindsight, Elijah replied. The challenge is seeing it in the moment and having the courage to address it. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived. Jax, chopper pilot Daniel Jackson, stood on their doorstep in civilian clothes, a six-pack of root beer in one hand. Thought the man of the hour might want to celebrate, he said with a grin, handing the root beer to Micah. You're the talk of the base, Commander. They sat on the back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Jax recounted the reaction at the base when the interview aired. The mess hall went completely silent, he said. Every sailor and officer just watching. And when it was over, standing ovation, sir. For what it's worth, you made a lot of people proud last night. I just said what needed saying, Elijah replied. That's what leaders do, Jax countered. Say what needs saying when others won't. He turned to Micah. Your dad's got a gift for that. Always has. As dusk settled around them, Jax shared stories from their deployments, the lighter moments, the times when Elijah's calm leadership had made the difference between success and failure. Micah listened intently, seeing his father through new eyes. Remember that hurricane evacuation? Jax asked. When you talked that family into the chopper, even though they were terrified of flying? Elijah nodded. The father was just trying to protect his kids. Fear looks like a lot of different things. Kind of like Coach Brent, Micah observed quietly. He was afraid too, wasn't he? Not of you, but of what you represented. Elijah and Jax exchanged surprised glances at the boys in sight. That's remarkably perceptive, Micah, Elijah said. I've been thinking about it a lot, Micah admitted. About why people acted the way they did. It doesn't make it okay, but I think I understand better now. Later, after Jax had left and Micah had gone to bed, Elijah sat alone on the deck, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. The night was quiet, a stark contrast to the public spotlight they'd been thrust into. His phone vibrated with a text from Lieutenant Vance. Saw this and thought of you. Attached was a photo of a handmade sign someone had placed at the soccer field. It read simply, "Everyone belongs here." A small smile crossed Elijah's face as he looked at the image. Change wouldn't happen overnight. There would still be sidelines where he wasn't welcome, still people who saw his presence as threatening rather than protective. But for tonight, in this moment, he allowed himself to feel that perhaps his silence, and then his words, had mattered. Inside, he checked on Micah, who was sleeping peacefully. On the boy's desk lay a notebook open to a page where he'd been drafting ideas for a school project. The title at the top read, "Heroes Don't Always Wear Uniforms." Elijah gently closed the notebook and pulled the blanket higher over his son's shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to stand firm in dignity. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of a storm weathered together, father and son had found something valuable, their voices and the courage to use them when it mattered most. The Monday morning sun cast long shadows across the school athletic fields as Elijah pulled into the parking lot. Micah sat beside him, soccer bag at his feet, a mixture of determination and nervousness on his face. You sure about this? Elijah asked, turning off the engine, Micah nodded. I'm sure. It was the first team practice since Coach Brent's resignation. The school had moved quickly to appoint an interim coach, Jason Miller, a former college player, who had been assistant coaching the high school team. The emergency meeting called for the team today was as much about reset as it was about practice. As they walked toward the field, Elijah noticed the other parents arriving. There was a different energy now, nods of acknowledgement, small waves, tentative smiles. No more whispers behind hands or pointed looks. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Coach Miller was already on the field, setting up cones for drills. He was younger than Coach Brent, with an easy manner that immediately put the players at ease. When he spotted Micah, he jogged over. You must be Micah, he said, extending his hand. I've heard you've got quite a left foot. Looking forward to seeing it in action. Micah shook his hand, a small smile forming. Thanks, Coach. Coach Miller turned to Elijah. Commander Reed, it's an honor. I'm Jason Miller. Mr. Reed is fine, Elijah said, shaking his hand. And the honor is mutual. I understand you played Division I soccer at State. For years as midfielder, Jason confirmed. Not quite as exciting as commanding Navy operations, but it taught me a thing or two about teamwork. He glanced around at the gathering players. That's what I'm hoping to rebuild here. A team. Elijah appreciated the directness. That's what Micah needs. What all these kids need. Well, I've watched the game films. Your son belongs in the starting lineup. His skill speaks for itself. Jason looked Elijah in the eye. And you belong wherever. You want to be during games. On the sideline, in the stands, wherever you're comfortable. The simple acknowledgement that Elijah had the right to watch his son play without justification meant more than elaborate apologies ever could. As other players arrived, Elijah found his usual spot on the sideline. Some parents joined him, making casual conversation about the upcoming season. The strained atmosphere of previous weeks had been replaced by something not quite comfortable yet, but certainly more genuine. On the field, Coach Miller gathered the team in a circle. Though Elijah couldn't hear everything, he caught phrases like fresh start and respect each other. The boys nodded solemnly. When practice began, the difference was immediately apparent. Micah moved with a confidence he hadn't shown in months. Coach Miller gave clear, constructive feedback, praising good plays regardless of who made them. There was no favoritism, no subtle dismissals, just straightforward coaching. After practice, several boys approached Micah, talking animatedly. Elijah watched as his son's shoulders relaxed, his gestures becoming more open. The isolation was ending. Quite a change, said a voice beside him. Elijah turned to find Principal Morris standing there, watching the boys. It's a start, Elijah replied. The board approved all our recommendations, she said. Coach Carson's termination is official as of this morning. We're implementing a new athletic code of conduct, and all coaches will undergo additional training. She hesitated. I wanted to apologize personally, Mr. Reed. I should have recognized what was happening sooner. Elijah studied her face, seeing the genuine regret there. Recognition is the first step. What matters now is what we build from here. As they drove home, Micah was more talkative than he'd been in weeks, describing Coach Miller's drills and how different the team dynamic felt. He actually listens when we make suggestions, Micah said, excitement brightening his voice. And he put me back at center mid, where I'm supposed to be. You earned that position, Elijah reminded him. Yeah, but Micah trailed off, looking out the window. It feels different when someone sees it, when they actually see you. The simple truth in his son's words struck Elijah deeply. To be seen, truly seen, was a fundamental human need, one that had been denied to both of them. The next 2 weeks brought steady, positive changes. Coach Miller revitalized the team's strategy and morale. Micah flourished under the new leadership, his natural talent finally receiving the nurturing it deserved. On the sidelines, Elijah found himself gradually drawn into conversations with other parents. Not because of his military rank or the viral video, but simply as Micah's father. One Tuesday afternoon, Elijah received an unexpected call from the Recreation Center director. Commander Reed, I'm hoping you might consider a proposal, the director began. We've had several families reach out asking if you would be willing to mentor some of our youth, particularly boys who might benefit from a positive male role model. The request caught Elijah off guard. I'm not a certified counselor or youth worker. "We're not looking for credentials," the director explained. "These kids need someone who understands what they're facing, someone who can show them how to navigate challenges with dignity." Your approach to the situation at the school made an impression not just on parents, but on the kids themselves. After careful consideration, Elijah agreed to meet with a small group twice a week. The boys ranged from 10 to 14, mostly kids of color who were struggling with confidence, identity, or the subtle prejudice that often went unacknowledged. His approach was straightforward: no lectures, no forced heart-to-hearts. Instead, he created a space where they could talk openly about their experiences while learning practical skills. Sometimes they played basketball or worked on homework. Other times they just sat in a circle, discussing how to handle specific situations they'd encountered. "My teacher always calls on the white kids first," one boy said during their third session. "Even when I raise my hand, she acts like she doesn't see me." Elijah nodded. "That happens. What have you tried so far?" "Nothing," the boy admitted. "What can I do?" "She's the teacher. You can speak to her privately," Elijah suggested. "Not accusatory, just information. I've noticed I don't get called on as often as others. I'd like to participate more." Give her the chance to recognize and correct the pattern. What if she doesn't? Then you document it. Keep track. And if needed, you go up the chain of command, just like in the military. But always lead with respect, even when it isn't returned. Word of the mentoring group spread, and soon Elijah found himself with a waiting list. What had started as a small commitment became a meaningful part of his routine. The boys looked forward to their sessions, and parents reported positive changes in their confidence and behavior. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Vance became a regular visitor at the Reed household, often bringing updates from the base or consulting with Elijah on the veteran transition program he was developing. One evening, she arrived with exciting news. "The Admiral approved your proposal," she announced, handing Elijah a folder, including the helicopter demonstration for the school's STEM day. Elijah reviewed the documents with satisfaction. "This will be good for the kids. Many of them have never seen military technology up close." The helicopter demonstration was scheduled for the following Friday, coincidentally on the same field where Elijah had been confronted months earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. This time, the helicopter's arrival would be a celebration rather than a revelation. The day of the demonstration dawned clear and bright. The entire school gathered on the athletic fields, students sitting in orderly rows, teachers and parents lining the perimeter. Elijah stood at the center of the field with Principal Morris and several Navy personnel, including Lieutenant Vance. When the distinctive sound of rotor blades filled the air, the children's faces lit up with excitement. The helicopter, the same one that had landed months ago, circled the field once before making a perfect landing. Jax emerged from the cockpit, saluting Elijah sharply before turning to address the awestruck students about aerodynamics and aviation. Careers that AS, the demonstration continued. Principal Morris leaned closer to Elijah. "We'd like to make this an annual event, if possible." And she hesitated. "The board has approved a small commemoration." She led him to the edge of the field, where a modest plaque had been installed near the sideline. It read, "In honor of Commander Elijah Reed, for exemplifying courage, grace, and integrity." Elijah stared at the plaque, momentarily at a loss for words. The location was deliberate, exactly where he had stood so many Saturdays, watching Micah play. "You don't have to say anything," Principal Morris assured him, misreading his silence as discomfort. "We just wanted to acknowledge. It's perfect," Elijah said quietly. "Thank you." The demonstration concluded with students lining up to peek inside the helicopter and ask questions of the Navy personnel. Micah moved through the crowd with newfound confidence, fielding questions from younger kids who now saw him as something of a celebrity by association. Later that week came the district championship game, a moment of truth for the rejuvenated team. Under Coach Miller's leadership, they had rebuilt their strategy and teamwork, earning their way to the finals against the top-ranked team in the region. The stands were packed, with far more spectators than usual for a youth soccer match. Elijah took his place on the sideline, now joined by several other parents who had gradually migrated to his area over the past weeks. The game was intense from the start, with both teams evenly matched. Coach Miller remained calm on the sideline, offering encouragement and strategic adjustments rather than the angry outbursts that had characterized Coach Brent's style. Micah played with focus and determination, his skills on full display. In the final minutes, with the score tied 2-2, he intercepted a pass at midfield, wove through two defenders, and fired a perfect shot into the top corner of the goal. The crowd erupted. Teammates mobbed Micah on the field. Coach Miller pumped his fist in the air. And on the sideline, Elijah allowed himself a moment of pure, unrestrained joy, applauding openly, a broad smile breaking across his usually composed face. As the team celebrated their district championship, Micah broke away from the group and ran to the sideline. He pointed directly at his father, acknowledging the man whose quiet strength had guided him through the darkest moments. Then he rejoined his teammates, hoisting the trophy together as a true team, standing among the other parents, receiving congratulations and sharing in the collective pride. Elijah Reed was no longer the isolated figure on the edge of the crowd. He was simply a father, seen and respected, celebrating his son's achievement. 3 months after the championship game, Elijah sat at his desk, pen hovering over a blank page. He'd been trying to write this letter for weeks, finding the right words elusive. How do you distill a lifetime of lessons into something a child can carry forward? Dear Micah, he began finally. There are things I want you to know, truths I've learned that might help you navigate this complex world. The letter flowed from there, reflections on dignity, restraint, strength, and identity. Not instructions, but offerings. Wisdom earned through experience, both painful and profound. Silence is not always weakness, he wrote. Sometimes it is the space where you gather your strength. But never mistake silence for surrender. There are moments that call for your voice. Moments when speaking truth becomes an act of love, not just for yourself, but for others who cannot yet speak. He wrote about Marie, Micah's mother, and how her quiet courage during her illness had taught him that strength comes in many forms. He wrote about the Navy, about leadership and responsibility. And he wrote about the soccer field, about standing his ground not out of pride, but out of principle. The world will not always see you clearly, the letter continued. But you must always see yourself clearly. Know your worth. Stand in your truth. And remember that how others treat you reflects their character, not yours. Elijah didn't plan to give Micah the letter now, perhaps on his 18th birthday or when he graduated high school. For now, it was enough to capture these thoughts, to create something his son could one day hold in his hands and recognize as a piece of his father's heart. The following Saturday, they made their monthly visit to the cemetery. Marie's grave was simple but well tended, with fresh flowers from their previous visit still brightening the stone. Micah placed a small pair of soccer cleats, his first pair, now outgrown, beside the headstone. Elijah added one of his service medals, carefully mounted in a small display case. I think Mom would have been proud of both of us, Micah said, his voice soft but steady. Elijah put his arm around his son's shoulders. She would have. She always saw the best in people, especially you. They stood together in comfortable silence, the spring breeze rustling through nearby trees. Micah had grown taller in the past months, his frame beginning to fill out. The events of the past year had matured him in other ways too. A quiet confidence, a deeper understanding of the world and his place in it. As they walked back to the car, Micah asked, "Did you hear about the PTA election?" Elijah nodded. "Ms. Williams won, I understand." Tanya Williams was the mother of one of the boys in Elijah's mentoring program, a single mom who had previously felt too intimidated to get involved with school leadership. She was also the first Black woman to be elected PTA president at the school. "She came to talk to our class about community involvement," Micah said. Some kids asked about what happened with Miss Simmons. Ms. Williams said it was a teachable moment for the whole community. That's what she called it. A diplomatic answer, Elijah observed. "Is that what you think it was? A teachable moment?" Elijah considered the question as they reached the car. "I think every moment has the potential to teach us something. The question is whether we're willing to learn." Later that week, Elijah received an unexpected email from Dean Mitchell. The reporter's coverage of the soccer field incident and its aftermath had been nominated for a regional journalism award. His series of reports had expanded beyond Elijah's story to examine similar patterns throughout the district, ultimately leading to policy changes at several schools. I couldn't have done this without your willingness to speak truth, Dean wrote. You taught me what real leadership looks like. Thank you. The recognition was a reminder of how far the ripples had spread from that confrontation on the soccer field. What had begun as a personal stand had become a catalyst for community reflection and change. That evening, Elijah was surprised to find Micah in his room, recording himself on his tablet. What's this? He asked, pausing in the doorway. Micah looked up, slightly embarrassed. I'm starting a podcast about sports and stuff, but also about, the other things, like what happened to us and how kids deal with that. A podcast? Elijah raised an eyebrow. That's ambitious. It's just for school at first, Micah explained. But Mr. Harris, my English teacher, says it could be bigger if I want. He's helping me set it up. He hesitated. Actually, I was hoping you'd be my first guest. A slow smile spread across Elijah's face. Your first guest, huh? I guess that makes me famous now. Micah grinned. Only a little. The podcast, titled More Than the Game, became Micah's passion project. What started as a school assignment evolved into a legitimate production, with growing listenership among students and parents alike. Micah tackled topics ranging from sports strategy to deeper discussions about belonging, identity, and standing up for yourself and others. Meanwhile, across town in a dimly lit dive bar, Brent Carson nursed a beer, watching a muted television mounted above the bar. The screen showed footage of the Navy demonstration at the school, with Elijah standing tall as students explored the helicopter. Brent's face darkened as he turned away, muttering under his breath, but the few other patrons paid him no mind. His bitter complaints found no audience here. In another part of town, Laura Simmons walked her dog past the school grounds. She paused briefly at the edge of the field, noticing the plaque that had been installed. She stood reading it, her expression unreadable, before continuing on her way. The other parents who passed by offered no greetings, their cold shoulders a continuing consequence of her exposed behavior. The naval base, Elijah's veteran transition program, was gaining traction. What had begun as a local initiative was attracting attention from higher command, with other bases requesting information on implementing similar programs. The core of Elijah's approach was addressing the psychological and social aspects of transition, helping military personnel prepare not just for civilian jobs, but for the subtle cultural shifts they would encounter. The challenge isn't just finding employment, he explained during a briefing with senior officers. It's navigating spaces where your identity is suddenly perceived differently, where the respect you earned through rank and service isn't immediately visible. His personal experience lent credibility to the program that no theoretical approach could match. Veterans in transition responded to Elijah's guidance because it came from a place of lived understanding, not just professional expertise. As summer approached, Micah's soccer team prepared for the regional tournament. Coach Miller had continued building on their success, creating a program based on skill development and mutual respect. The team's reputation had grown, attracting players who previously might have joined more established programs. During a team fundraiser, parents unveiled new jerseys for the upcoming tournament. On the back, above each player's number, was the name read in small letters, a tribute not just to Micah, but to the principles his father had stood for. When Micah presented the jersey to Elijah, his father stared at it in surprise. Coach Miller and the parents' committee decided together, Micah explained. They said it's to remind everyone what the team stands for now. Elijah ran his fingers over the letters, deeply moved by the gesture. That's quite an honor. We also have a new cheer, Micah added with a grin. After someone scores, everyone yells Commander. It's pretty cool. The transformation was remarkable, from being ostracized to having his family name become a symbol of the team's identity. The journey had come full circle. One evening in late spring, Elijah received a call from Admiral Blackwood. Reed, I've got a new assignment for you, the Admiral said without preamble. The Secretary is establishing a task force on military family support and community integration. He wants you to head it. Elijah sat up straighter. That's a significant expansion of our current program, sir. It is, and it comes with a promotion to captain. You've earned it, Reed. What you've built here has applications far beyond our initial scope. The promotion meant greater responsibility, but also greater opportunity to effect change. Elijah accepted, with the condition that the program remain headquartered at their current location. My son has put down roots here, he explained. After everything we've been through, stability matters. The Admiral agreed readily. Your family is part of what makes you right for this, Reed. You understand what's at stake in a way others don't. That weekend, the weather was perfect for Micah's regional tournament opener. The stands were packed with supporters, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. Elijah took his place on the sideline, now comfortably surrounded by other parents, who had become friends over the months. As the team took the field, Elijah spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Lieutenant Vance had come to watch the game, out of uniform but easily recognizable. She gave him a quick salute from the stands, a gesture of respect between colleagues that had become a friendly ritual. The game began with the smooth coordination of a well-coached team. Micah, now one of the team leaders, directed plays with confidence, his skill evident in every touch of the ball. Coach Miller paced the sideline, offering encouragement and strategic adjustments in the closing minutes. With the score tied, Micah orchestrated a perfect sequence, drawing defenders toward him before making a precise pass to a teammate who scored the winning goal. As the crowd erupted in cheers, Micah looked to the sideline, finding his father's eyes. The silent exchange between them held volumes: pride, understanding, shared history. After the game, as players and parents celebrated, Elijah stood slightly apart, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. So much had changed since that first confrontation on the field. What had begun as an attempt to push him away had instead created a community more aware, more inclusive, more honest about its shortcomings and aspirations. Lieutenant Vance joined him at the edge of the crowd. Quite a different scene from when I picked you up in a helicopter, she observed. Elijah nodded. Different in all the right ways. Your son's got talent, she said, watching as Micah laughed with teammates. And leadership potential. Like father, like son. He's his own person, Elijah replied. But yes, he's finding his way. As they drove home after the celebration, Micah rolled down his window, letting the warm evening air fill the car. Dad, he asked suddenly, do you ever think about what would have happened if Jax hadn't shown up with that helicopter? If people never found out you were a commander? Elijah considered the question. I think the truth would have found another way to surface. Maybe not as dramatically, but eventually. But it changed everything, Micah persisted. People started listening to you because of who you are. They started listening, Elijah corrected gently, because events forced them to see what was happening. The helicopter got their attention, yes. But what changed things was what came after. The conversations, the accountability, the willingness to acknowledge harm and make amends. They drove in silence for a moment before Elijah continued. I never raised my voice. I never fought back with fists. But still I was heard. Because silence, when built on truth, is louder than noise. Micah nodded, absorbing his father's words. As they turned onto their street, the setting sun cast long shadows across the neighborhood. Houses where they had once felt unwelcome now displayed friendly waves from porches. Children who had once avoided Micah now called out greetings as they passed. That it wasn't perfect. There would always be more work to do, more conversations to have, more understanding to build. But in this moment, driving home with his son after a victory that meant far more than a soccer game, Elijah Reed felt something he hadn't fully experienced since before Marie's death. A sense of belonging, of community, of home. The quiet strength that had sustained him through confrontation now supported a different kind of mission, building a legacy not just of resilience in the face of prejudice, but of transformation through principled engagement. It was a legacy he could be proud to pass on to his son, and through him, to countless others who would learn from their story. What would you have done if you witnessed this injustice from the sidelines? Sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice isn't loud confrontation, but quiet dignity that forces others to face their own reflection. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share to help these crucial conversations reach those who need them most.